Welcome to the next part of your Designing Your First Pitch Deck course. I'm Jenna and I'm super excited to be taking you on this journey. And right now we're diving into where to even begin with your pitch deck. You might be thinking that you're going to start developing the content straight away, whereas actually that's coming later in the course. Where to start is around developing your story. Once you can really get clear on the story behind you and your business, that will help make the rest of your pitch flow so much easier and be much more impactful for the audience that you're delivering your pitch to. So let's get started with stories, because I talk a lot about storytelling and narrative, and there's a reason behind this, because stories are really powerful. If you can hook and capture the attention of your audience straight away from your pitch, whether you're delivering that in person or whether you're sending it to someone, that's really going to help you make that great first impression to make an impact for the rest of your pitch as well. And I've got two questions to kick off with. A third one is coming up shortly. And as we go through this part of the course, start to make some notes and start to think about some of the things that come up and the actions to take. The first question I want you to think about is, how does your idea make someone's life better? It's quite a big question, but really think about the idea for your business, whether that's a product, whether that's a service. What impact does that have on someone else? It might be that you're supporting a range of different businesses. It might be that you're supporting individual customers, but what is the difference that it's going to make to that end user? The next question I want you to think about is, how does your idea make the world a better place? Now, you can think of these two questions interchangeably. So how does it make someone's life better? How does it make the world a better place? And what we're really doing here is encouraging you to think about the impact of your idea, because often it might go further than what you initially think. But if you can make even just a small change or a small impact on someone else or the world, then that's going to be a big difference. It doesn't have to be this groundbreaking thing that you're doing, but it's going to have some sort of positive impact, which is probably why you came up with the idea in the first place. So just think about that as we start to go through the rest of this part of the course. And the third question to think about is, how is your idea different to existing solutions out there? There's going to be other people or other businesses that are tackling the same problem that you are. And that's okay. Having competition is healthy, but identifying what makes you different is what's really key. So what is it that makes you different? Is it a different approach that you're taking, a different type of technology, a different route that you're going for? Maybe it's a slightly different audience you're going after to really impact them in a certain way. But that differentiation factor is really key to think about. So again, just getting started with these few questions to think about before we dive into developing your story. Okay, let's move on to the 3 founder story types that we're going to be focusing on in this part of the course. So you've done a little bit of thought processes with those questions and a real starting point to get you thinking about the impact that your business and your idea will have. Now we're starting to think about the types of stories that you can develop that's going to help make you as impactful as possible and memorable whenever you're developing your pitch. So these 3 founder story types are your origin story, your user story, and your industry story. Now, I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail. And as I said at the start, you can follow along, you can pause the video, you can make some notes, but there are going to be some actions at the end to follow this up and make sure you're coming away with these 3 story types to pick and choose from and develop as you go along in your journey. Let's start with that origin story. Now, the focus for the origin story is really on your own narrative. You as the founder of this business, you as the person that's come up with this idea, we're really thinking about your own narrative and your own story. And this is a really nice place to start, to think about what made you come up with this idea in the first place, and also thinking about why you're doing it. And that's what's really key, starting with why. And we're going to dig into that shortly. So here we go. This really focuses on the why behind your business. And this is what I want you to think about when you're developing this story. So when you hear an origin story, often it looks something like this. It might start with you as the founder living your life and you encounter some sort of problem. The middle part of that story will be you seeking to overcome that problem with maybe solutions out there, but there's not really anything that exists yet that solves this problem. You're coming up against some barriers. You then make it your purpose or your vision to overcome that problem. And then the ending as it progresses is that you progress on your journey in bringing a solution to life. And you think about this big vision, how many more people suffer from this problem that you've found, and who could you impact as well? Now, one thing to think about as we're going through these stories is that one of these stories might resonate more with you than others, and that's okay, because it very much depends on the type of business that you're coming up with, that you're running. It depends if it's a product, if it's a service, what industry you're in, for example. There's so many factors that will dictate what story might resonate most. But give it a go with developing all 3 stories to start, and you'll probably find yourself gravitating towards 1 or 2 to dive into a little bit further. So what should you consider, and how can you actually start developing your origin story? There's 4 key things to think about and 4 key areas. And this all feeds really nicely into some of the content that's going to be developed in your pitch when we start to get to that point shortly in the course. So the first question is, what were you doing when you landed on your idea? And I call this your spark moment. And we'll come on to this in a bit more detail as well. But just high level, just think about, can you remember what you was doing when you came up with this idea? It might be tough to do, but for some of you might be thinking, I know exactly the time, date, and place when this idea came to mind. So just start thinking about that. Then think about, when did you realize that the problem needed solving? So what evidence did you get? Maybe it was that through your own research, you couldn't find a solution to this problem. It might be that you started to dig into this and you found some statistics and facts that really emphasized and showed evidence that this is actually something that needs solving. So when did you realize there was a problem? And then the next part to think about is the how, in terms of how you've progressed so far. So what's the interest in your business? This is what we use this word traction for. It's a term you'll probably come across quite a lot throughout your journey. It really just means, what's the interest in this problem or the interest in your business? So this could be, as a starting point, as an early stage founder, the research that you've done behind the problem you're solving. You can prove that there's a need for this. You might have done some research with individuals, you might have done some surveys, and you've got some stats to back that up. X number of people believe this, or maybe you've got some other data to pull on. And this is really where that unique selling point comes in. So how have you noticed how you're different to competitors? How have you noticed that there was a need for a different angle, a different approach, a different type of product that's not on the market at the moment? And finally, what's the next step? So what's the potential and what's the vision for your business? And this is really trying to give you this really nice journey, this nice pathway of when you started this idea, where it came to mind, what's the progress you've made so far, what's the next step? Try to keep it quite high level and don't overthink it too much. Just start to make some notes for each of these questions. And I mentioned we're going to come into a bit more detail on that spark moment. And that's really where this can come in to set up your story. So setup actually stands for these 5 points. So the SETUP is a really nice way of remembering what I've just asked you. So everything you've done here is around setting up your story. So remember what we spoke about: the spark moment, the evidence that you found, the traction, the interest in your business so far, the USP, so what is it that makes you different, and then finally the potentials. This is quite an easy 5-point way to remember what it is we're speaking about. So hopefully that makes sense so far, and you're still with me, and you've really given some thought to what that origin story, which is your own narrative, looks like. The second founder story is now your user story. So if the origin one wasn't quite sitting and you think, actually, there wasn't this moment, it's kind of progressed over the years, there's not really much of that spark moment and that setup doesn't really resonate, don't worry. You've given it some thought. Now let's move on to the next story type. So this is your user story, which is about your customer's narrative. So where the origin story was about you and your narrative, this is about your customer, who it is that you're serving as part of your business. Let's dive into what this story looks like in a little bit more detail. So the focus for your user story is on your audience. Whereas previously the origin story, the focus was on your why, this is now going a bit further to your audience. And the story might look something like this. So you might introduce a character who has a problem and they're going through life trying to deal with this problem. So we're really trying to get ourselves in the shoes of a customer of your business. So introducing you to this person, this is who they are, and this is what they're going through. Nice little setup there. The middle part of that story is then their discovery of your product or service that deals with the problem and hopefully experiences a big difference from before. Now, this obviously depends, and this can be tweaked depending on the stage of business that you're at. So it might be that you set up, this is the problem that this person's facing. This is what they've tried, and there hasn't been a solution that exists until now. This is how we help that person. So you might be really early stage. So you're showing the potential of how your business can help. If you're later stage, then you're showing how your business has helped an existing customer, for example. And then to end that up and sort of continue that journey on, there's almost this vision and this imagine if scenario. So imagine how many more people like the character you brought to life could benefit from your service, your product, or your solution. So it's give you a bit of a flavor. And now I'm going to give you some things to consider when you're developing this user story. Again, you can make notes as we go along, or you can pause it and come to it later. So some questions to consider as you're developing your user story. So firstly, who is your user? Who is your customer? Really try to get quite clear on your target market. And if you can almost paint this picture of this character that your target user is based on, that's really nice, a nice way to make it as specific as possible. Then think about what their current reality is. So what's their situation? What's the problem that they're experiencing? What does that look like? Before you then go into what's their desired reality. So where are they now and where do they want to be? So what's their goal? What's their desired reality of where they want to be? This is where they're at with this problem. This is where they want to be. After that, start thinking about the barriers that are stopping them to make this shift. So where they're at now, where they want to be, what's stopping them getting there? What are the barriers? What are the solutions out there that just aren't fit for purpose at the moment? And then finally, how are they using current solutions? So those barriers are probably linked to those current solutions. So what is it that they're doing with those current solutions at the moment? And there's going to be something missing there. There's going to be something that's missing that's stopping them getting to that desired reality. So again, we're not going to spend loads of time on this together, but you can take these questions away and go into a lot more detail on what that might look like. So that's your user story. We've focused on your origin story, your user story, and the third and final story type is your industry story. And this is really your market's narrative. We focused on your narrative, we focused on your customer's narrative. Now it's about the market. And like I said before, you might be resonating with one or two of the stories so far. You might not have quite got the connection yet. Maybe this is the one for you. So let's work through this at the same time, similar to the other two. So what did your industry story focus on? It focuses on your market, and this is what that story might look like. You start quite big. So yeah, there's an industry that you're operating in, and it's operated in the same way as it always has. So for years, for decades, hundreds of years, however long that might be, this is the way the industry has operated and continues to do so. The middle part of this story then really explores what changes are happening that mean it's no longer fit for purpose to carry on in this way. So maybe it's societal changes, changes in the environment, various areas that could impact this industry that means it's no longer fit for purpose. The end and the progression of this story is then that you've identified an opportunity for a new business to take advantage of, and it's your business that's in the right place at the right time. This is really nice if you're disrupting an industry, if you've really spotted this opportunity and you're disrupting how it's operating, however small that might be to start with, whatever that potential might be as well. So this is the starting point and the flavor of this industry story that focuses on your market. And again, some things to consider as you're building this story type out. Think about what the status quo is for your industry. So what is it that's happening at the moment? What's going on in this industry? How is it operating? What's the baseline? How's it always operated? just to give us a bit of a flavor. Because don't forget, when you are pitching, it might be that the person you're pitching to isn't familiar with this industry. So actually doing these questions and answering these questions really helps for you to get clear in some content that might be useful when you start delivering and developing your pitch deck later on in the course. The next thing to think about is, why is it that it's no longer fit for purpose? So why is the way that this industry is operating no longer sustainable, no longer fit for purpose? Give us a little bit of an insight into that. So you're kind of educating us on the industry that you probably know quite a lot about, but your audience might not. Think about the changes that are happening, or what changes are coming. This is a really key one, because it might be that you can see that there's changes that are coming in this industry and you're ahead of the game. It might be that changes have already happened or are happening and you're jumping in at that point. So what are those changes that are happening? What are the changes that are coming? The next thing to think about is, who are the key players in this industry? And these are going to be competitors, maybe they're not, but it's really understanding who is it that's operating in this industry, who are the key players. Maybe there's changes that they've noticed, maybe not, but really showing an understanding that you know your market, you know your industry, you know who's operating in it. And then the final thing to think about is, where are the gaps? What's the opportunity? And you've probably thought about this already, because that's where the opportunity and the idea for your business came from. But what are the gaps and what's the opportunity that you've identified for this particular industry? Those are the things to consider. And again, take your time with it, answer those questions, and you'll start to form these 3 really powerful founder story types that you can pull on depending on who you're speaking to. Because it probably is going to be the case that you can chop and change what story you use when you're in front of various audiences. And this links really nicely to our next part of the course that's coming up shortly, when we start to venture into your building blocks of your pitch. These stories could be really powerful to kick off and really hook your audience and engage them right from the very beginning. But knowing who you're pitching to is really key to know what story might land better. What story is going to be much more impactful for the audience that you're in front of? Now, that's quite a big chunk of that course, because that's a really great starting point of, where do I start with my pitch? Let's start about developing your story. And you've got 3 story types to venture into there, as we then move into developing your pitch building blocks and getting the content of your pitch underway. I look forward to seeing you there.